All right, the chapter 1 sample test. Let's go through it here. First of all, I like to put these one point over the other. So that's -1, 4, and then it's 3, -2. Figure out the change in the x, which is these. It goes from -1 to 3, so if I picture a number line, going from -1 to 3, that has to go 4 steps. -1 to 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. That's 4. So to go from here to here, I have to go +4. And to go from 4 to -2, I have to go backwards 6 steps. 4 to get to 0, and then 2 more to get to -2. So this is going down 6. So change in y is -6. Now the length of a segment is simply the Pythagorean theorem, because if you're going from one point to the other one, there's a change in x and there's a change in y, and we have a change in x of +4 and a change in y of -6. So to find the hypotenuse, we do Pythagorean theorem, -6 squared or 4 squared, change in x squared, plus the change, -6, in y squared. The negative doesn't really matter, because when we square -6, we get 36, and 4 squared is 16, so we got 16 plus 36. The square root of that is the square root of 52. Some of you are typing that in the calculator and getting 7 point something, and some of you are realizing this is 4 times 13, so it'd be 2 square root of 13 if you reduce it, but this is good enough. Midpoint, that's just the average of the x's. So x on one of them is -1, the x on the other one is 3, add them up, divide by 2. And its average of the y's, 4 plus a -2, divided by 2. -1 plus 3 is 2, divided by 2 is 1. 4 plus a -2 is 2, divided by 2 is 1. There's the midpoint. Make sure you put the parentheses or I will dock you points. Now, if A is the midpoint of a segment and B is at one end, this was A and B, B is at one end, A is the midpoint, C must be up there. So we would have to go back 4 and up 6 to get to A, back 4 and up 6 to get to A, and so then we do it again. Back 4, so -1, back 4 more, that would take us to -5, and up 6, so we went this way is down 6, so up 6 takes us to 4, up 6 more takes us to 10. So it's -5, 10. Determine the slope. That's the rise or change in y, because y is in rise, -6, over the run, which is the change in x, or 4, that reduces to -3/2 or -1.5, whichever way you want it. So using that in this, we'd have y equals -3/2 x plus the y-intercept that we have to figure out. And if we use the point -1 for the x, we're supposed to get 4 for the y. Well, -1 times -3/2 is 3/2 plus something is supposed to come out to be 4. 3/2 is 1.5. If I subtract 1.5 from 4, I find out b is 4 minus 1 is 3 minus another half is 2.5. So b has to be 2.5. So the equation is y equals -3/2 x plus 2.5 or 5/2. check our answer, we should get the same b, or we should be able to put in 3 for the x and minus 2, come up with minus 2 for the y. So if we have minus 3 halves times x of 3, and then add 2 and 1/2, we should come up with minus 2. Let's see if we do. So this is 3 over 1, so 3 times minus 3 is minus 9 over 2 times 1, which is 2, plus this is 5 halves. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 more is 5 halves. 2 1/2 is 5 halves. And minus 9 plus 5 is minus 4 over 2 is minus 2. So that checked. We should be able to put in 3 and get minus 2, which we did. The general form, this is supposed to be an equal in here, so that's a mistake on my copy here. Or it can be plus c equals 0, either way. But that's probably the easiest. This is the way I like to find the equation because it's easy to do in my head. We already know the change in y is -6, so it's -6x. Then it's subtract change in x, which is 4, times y is supposed to equal the same number for any point on the line. So if we put in -1 and 4 for the y, we get 6 minus 4 times 4 is minus 16. That's -10. And I should be able to put in 3 and -2 and come up with minus 10. So we'll check that. Minus 6 times 3 minus 4 times -2. So that's -18. And -4 times -2 is plus 8. That's -10. So it checks. And if it's the equation of the same line, the line through the 2 points, I should be able to take this equation and convert it to this other equation that we had in part 8 by solving for y. So I would add 6x to both sides, so I'd have -4y equals 10 plus 6x, and then I would divide everything by -4, and I get y equals 10 divided by 4 is 2.5, and this would be negative 2, oh, this was -10, sorry, -10, -10, -10. -10 divided by -4 is positive 2.5, plus, and 6 divided by -4 is -3 over 2x. And so if I put this before the 2.5, I don't have to change the sign to turn these around, and I get y equals -3 halves x plus 2 1/2. Same answer as we had before. The other one that you're supposed to know is the point slope form, where you write y, there's no 1 or 2 under it, so it's just the letter y, the variable y, minus y from one of the points. So if I use the y from the first point, it was a 4, so y minus 4 parentheses equals m, the slope, which is -3 halves, times x, no 1 or 2 on it, so it's just x, minus x from the first point. The x from the first point is -1, so minus a -1. And that should be the equation. Now minus a minus is actually plus, so I can make that change. So we'd have y minus 4 equals -3 halves times x plus 1. Now this should work with the other point, 2. So let's put in the 3 for the x and negative 2 for the y. So negative 2 minus 4 equals negative 3 halves times, and the other point, the x is 3, 3 plus 1. 3 plus 1 is 4. So we'd have negative 3 halves times 4 over 1. So that'd be negative 12 over 2, which is negative 6 on this side. And negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. They are equal, so it checks by using the other point. Now we should be able to change this to look like this one by solving for y. Well, the only thing we have to do is add 4 to the other side, but also distribute here. So I'll distribute first. Y minus 4 equals negative 3 halves times the x, and also times the 1. And now if I add 4 over to this side, I get y equals negative 3 halves x plus negative 3 halves plus 4, adding 4 to both sides. Negative 1.5 plus 4 is 2.5, so we get negative 3 halves x plus 2 1/2. And we have that same equation that we had up here. Okay, determine the equation of line parallel to AB. If it's going to be parallel to AB, it has to have the same slope. The y-intercept controls where it crosses the y-axis. We're just going to change that, and it had a slope of negative 3 halves, so we've got to keep the same slope. So we're going to have y equals negative 3 halves x, but a different y-intercept. And it goes through the point 1 for the x and 0. So negative 3 halves times 1 is negative 3 halves plus something. So I get 0 has to be negative 3 halves plus b. Add 3 halves to both sides, and b has to be 3 halves. So our equation is y equals negative 3 halves x plus 3 halves. If I want to do perpendicular, if I'm going down 3 and over 2 and I want to be perpendicular to that, I have to be, that means at 90 degrees, it has to be up, whatever the change in that was, which was 2, up 2, and over 3. Up 2 for 3, so that slope would be 2/3. The negative reciprocal of the other slope. Negative, this was negative 3 halves, the opposite is positive, and this was 3 halves, it becomes 2/3. Opposite sign and reciprocal. So it becomes y equals 2/3 x plus something, and it's supposed to go through 4 and come out to be 2. 4 times 2/3 is 8/3. So I'd have y equals, actually 2 equals 8/3 plus whatever that b is. So 8/3 is 2 2/3. So if I subtract 2 2/3 from both sides, I got 2 minus 2 2/3 equals b, which is minus 2/3. So the equation is y equals 2/3 x minus 2/3 for the perpendicular. All right, 16, one of the harder ones now. Determine the points on the y-axis that are 5 units from B. B was out at 1, 2, 3, minus 2. And I'm supposed to be on the y-axis 5 units away. Well, this is only 3 if I go straight to it, so I'm going to have to angle up here someplace. I don't know where, but if I'm on the y-axis, the x-coordinate has to be 0 because I'm not sideways anywhere, and I'm up some amount that I'm not sure about. And I'm trying to find that place. Well, actually, there's 2 places. There's one down here too. So the distance between these 2 points has to be 5. Using the distance formula that we had up there, the distance has to be the square root of the change in x. So if I go from 0 to 3, that's 3 squared plus the change in y. Well, that will be whatever y is minus a minus 2. Y minus a minus 2. That's the change in the y squared. Now let's solve this for y. First of all, let's square both sides to get rid of the square root, and 5 squared is 25 equals 3 squared is 9, and this I'm going to leave as y minus a minus is plus 2 quantity squared. Subtract 9 from both sides and I get 16 equals y plus 2 quantity squared. So now I can get rid of the square by taking the square root of both sides, and that would be the square root of 16 is, don't forget, when I take the square root, it's plus or minus 4 equals y plus 2. And then I subtract 2 from both sides and I get y is equal to minus 2 plus or minus 4. So minus 2 plus 4, minus 2 plus 4 is 2. Minus 2 minus 4 is negative 6. So y has to be a plus 2 or minus 6. So those points are, because I asked for the points, so you should be telling me, okay, it's 0 in the x because it's not sideways, and up 2, or it's 0 in the x, down 6. Now, if I was asking you to be 5 units away on the x-axis, the point would be something like x comma 0, because the height is always 0 on the x-axis. And you would have x minus 3, and the change in y would always be 2. Just in case I swap them on the actual test. Alright, that's page 1 of the sample test.